50 years ago, the sport of rallying was more for fun than profit. Drivers mostly owned their own cars and relished the idea of long-distance events across Europe. It was generally a relaxed and quite gentlemanly affair. But not anymore. Rallying today is an all-action, big-budget sport with professional drivers and factory teams from most manufacturers. But it was more than a dozen years ago, back in the early 80s, that the budgets and the action soared to heights unheard of before or since. This was the era of the Group B rally supercars. The Group B cars made such an impact that motorsports fans will never forget them. They came about in 1981, when the International Automobile Federation relaxed its previous production car rules and allowed cars built purely for rally competition. In essence, they were the Formula One cars of the mountain and forest roads. The Federation had opened the doors for manufacturers to race the fastest, noisiest, most spectacular cars ever seen on rally stages. 5 years later, the doors were slammed shut and Group B was banished to the history books. The reasons were plain and simple. Faster and faster cars, combined with wilder and crazier crowds, meant that in the confines of World Rally Championship competition, the Group B rocket ships were just too fast to race. Thankfully, there are people who are determined that these cars are not going to become just memories recorded on film or in the pages of books and magazines. Members of the British-based Group B Car Club are dedicated to keeping them in flat-out action. They are out, flat out, on any piece of dirt or tarmac which happens to be available on any given weekend. Thanks to the club, owners and enthusiasts for this greatest ever era of rallying can still enjoy these supercars being driven as they were meant to be driven before the international competition ban came into force. Battling the elements in often lonely and usually spectacular scenery has always added a romantic and adventurous theme to rallying. It just can't be reproduced by modern track racing on closed circuits. Today, rallies are as close as you can get to those incredible city-to-city events in which cars raced across Europe just after the start of the 20th century. Or the Mille Miglia, which used to roar for 1,000 miles around Italy, until it was banned when crowd control became impossible and fatalities resulted in 1957. Ironically, although rallies are generally being staged far away from centres of population, crowd enthusiasm during the Group B era became so great that the same problems beset the World Rally Championship. There were crowd fatalities, and the sport came close to being banned completely. Only the commitment to cut the performance of the cars by banning Group B saved the sport as we know it. Even so, rallying will never see a return to these relaxed and sporting days when the main aim was to cross Europe at some predetermined average speed. There were a few driving tests along the way, and then it was time to enjoy yourself at some exotic destination like Monte Carlo. Not that the sport wasn't demanding enough in the 1950s. Neither the roads nor the cars were anything like as good as those of today. Just getting a car from London to Monte Carlo at any kind of speed was an achievement in itself, especially when it involved crossing alpine passes 10,000 feet high with cars whose power which rarely exceeded 60 or 70 horsepower. By the 1960s, even small cars were getting sportier and manufacturer interest was growing by leaps and bounds. Rallying was no longer just the domain of the sports car or the large capacity sports saloon. Major manufacturers like the British Motor Corporation were viewing rallies as a way to effectively publicise both the stamina and the speed of even their most humble models. The legendary Mini, for example, achieved much of its eventual cult status by running rings around bigger and clumsier cars in classic events such as the Monte Carlo Rally. Typical rally terrain was still very different from that which we know today. The long and demanding road sections was still the core of any major event, even though many were by now including special stages on mountain climbs or forest roads closed off to regular traffic. Drivers obviously had to be fast and skillful to keep up high overall averages on public roads, often in adverse conditions. As well as speed, however, regularity and reliability, plus map reading and navigational skills, played an equally important part. The current essence of flat-out timed competition in cars prepared purely for that purpose was only just starting to filter through. By the time the 70s arrived, public road sections were really only included in rallies to link the special stages and to retain the essential character of the sport. The co-driver was now there to read pace notes rather than route maps. When the face of rallying changed, so did the look of the cars involved. This was the car that made the biggest leap forward in the entire history of the sport. The Lancia Stratos was first seen in 1973, to the absolute amazement of everyone involved in rallying. It was truly 10 years ahead of its time in both concept and performance. To maintain rallying's links with production cars, the International Automobile Federation insisted on 400 examples of any competing car being built. That, they thought, was a big enough number to deter anyone from building a car purely for competition. It didn't deter Lancia. They went ahead and built 400 examples of the Stratos and stood the entire sport on its head. The pure rally racers had arrived. Amazingly, the Stratos rally car which went into production bore no resemblance to any previous production or competition model. It was based on this highly futuristic concept car, which Italian styling and engineering specialist Bertone had unveiled purely as an attention-grabbing show car in 1970. To think of turning such a car into a World Championship rally competitor surely took a very special stroke of genius. The Stratos concept car had been powered by a Lancia engine, but initially the Stratos rally car had little more Lancia content than its badge. Bertone styled and built the car using various components sourced from the giant Fiat Group, which owned Lancia, and equally as important to the project, Ferrari.
Bertone in this car, I would say that out of the show prototype of 1970, he developed in 1971 the real Stratos for Lancia. The Stratos was planned for be the rally car of Lancia for the future. And a new engine, a new Lancia engine also was planned for this car, an engine which never came out of Lancia. So to overtake this problem, Bertone in the same time, it was 72, 73, he was working on the Ferrari Dino 308, so he had plenty of Ferrari engine in his works. And one day he surprised Lancia people by showing a Stratos in driving condition. And they asked, what's the engine in that car? Don't worry, I had the Ferrari engine, they put the Ferrari engine inside. And out of this idea, which was an idea just for moving the car, Cesare Fiorio negotiated very well with the Ferrari at the time and convinced Ferrari to sell to Lancia few hundreds of their Ferrari engine, which at the time it was not so easy to accept Ferrari selling their engine, even to a company which was part of the Fiat Group. So finally the car, the Lancia Stratos, was rallying with a Lancia emblem, but with the Ferrari engine.
Seen here in official Bertone library footage, the Lancia Stratos is a car of which the design company is justly proud. From their purely conceptual vehicle, they developed one of the great competition cars of all time. A car which won 3 World Rally Championships and which set the standard by which all its competitors were measured. With its short wheelbase and wide profile, along with the compact and powerful V6 Ferrari Dino engine, the Stratos was intended purely and simply for rally competition. But if you wanted to buy one for some public roads posing, then that was fine by Lancia management. If you wanted one so that you could contest national and international rallies, then so much the better. The car scored its debut win in the World Championship round at San Remo, Italy in 1973, and then just kept on winning. Other manufacturers were forced to raise their game to compete, and the Stratos was not totally invincible. For most of the mid-70s, however, few rivals got a look in. And even as late as 1980, after Fiat had won another world title with its Abarth 131, they still occasionally wheeled out a Stratos to do battle in events which suited its particular characteristics. Truly, the Stratos must be considered as one of the most significant rally cars of all time. This neat little car is the Renault R5 Turbo, a great favourite with members of the Group B car club and with many other sporting drivers who believe great things can come in small packages. In 1980, Renault was the first rival manufacturer to take a leaf out of the Lancia instruction book for success in rallying and build a special car primarily for competition use. Ostensibly, it was a competition version of the little R5 saloon Renault was selling by the thousand to drivers around the world who enjoyed a small, attractive car with nippy performance and economical running. The R5 Turbo utilised the normal car's engine block and a few other components as starting points in its design, but the resemblance to the little family car stopped right there. The Turbo, for example, had its engine where the rear seats of the standard model were to be found. And this engine was turbocharged to put out almost 150 horsepower, about double the output of the standard model. Finally, whereas the standard car was front-wheel drive, the R5 Turbo's engine drove the rear wheels, just like all serious competition cars of that time. The power-to-weight ratio of the Turbo was very high, and its acceleration was shattering for such a small car. From only a 1400cc four-cylinder engine, it could get from 0 to 100 miles an hour in just 11 seconds. No wonder it's so popular with the members of the Group B car club. The box-like aerodynamics of the little car kept top speed to around 130 miles an hour in standard trim, but it's suspected that the more powerful factory rally cars could top 140. Handling, particularly on narrow and twisting tarmac roads, was the car's strong point. It was almost as wide as it was long and had the pinpoint steering accuracy of a big go-kart. The R5 Turbo was on the market from 1980 to 1985, and it came in several versions offering different body trim. By 1980, the Renault factory was well into its hugely successful Formula One program, so the time and the budget spent on the R5 Turbo's World Championship rally involvement was minimal by the company's usual standards. Even so, the R5 Turbo made a real impact on international rallying. At the height of the Group B wars, running against the most powerful possible opposition, it scored outright wins in the 2 rallies which mean most to the French. The little Turbo won the Monte Carlo rally and took 2 victories in the Tour de Corse, accepted by all as the toughest tarmac rally on the World Championship calendar. In 1980, alongside the little Renault, came the next giant step in rally car technology, in the form of the 5-cylinder turbocharged 4-wheel drive Audi Quattro. Audi was an old name in the German industry, but it was relaunched in the 1970s on a worldwide basis as part of the VW family. The company's roots went back to the famous pre-war names of Auto Union and DKW, so innovation in technology was nothing new to them. These two brands have produced some of the world's most famous racing cars and motorcycles. The new Audi, however, had been launched with some rather mundane family saloons, and by the end of the 70s, company management had decided that a change of image was needed. Vorsprung durch Technik, progress through technology, was the Audi slogan, and the Audi Quattro represented true Vorsprung in the world of rally competition. It was as significant to rally car development as the Lancia Stratos had been 7 years earlier. Rival manufacturers had initially been sceptical about four-wheel drive's advantages in rallying, thinking it too weighty and too complicated. The Quattro soon made believers of them. It won the first rally it ever contested, the Austrian round of the European Championship, only 2 weeks into the 1981 season. Then, in what was essentially the car's development year, Hannu Mikkola won World Championship rounds in both Sweden and Great Britain. Obviously, much of the focus of the 1982 World Championship season was going to be upon the Audi effort. Even more so because one of their best chances of taking the title was the attractive all-woman team of Michèle Mouton and Fabrizia Pons. The dark-eyed Frenchwoman had already proved herself the equal of any male rivals by winning the San Remo round of the World Championship in 1981, the first ever such victory by a woman. Michèle is still the only female to win a World Championship motorsports event of any description. Other team drivers were Flying Finn Hannu Mikkola and, on a limited event programme, the speedy Swede Stig Blomqvist. But even before the end of the 1982 season, Michèle had outscored these formidable teammates in terms of both wins and places. The most serious rivals to Audi's bid for World Championship glory were always going to be the combination of Germany's Walter Röhrl and the well-proven Opel Ascona. But even he recognised the threat posed by Audi's new technology.
In erster Linie, was mir Anfang des Jahres klar war, dass mein Gegner eine neue Technologie ist, ein neues Auto, ein vierradgetriebenes Auto, das den Weg in die Zukunft weist. Und gegen dieses Auto werde ich wahrscheinlich verlieren.
Walter was never one of rallying's most flamboyant characters, but he was a fearsome and intelligent rival. Certainly, no one overshadowed him in terms of driving skills, and he was never a pilot who adopted the win or crash strategy. If he knew his car couldn't match the pace of the Audis in certain conditions, then he would gladly settle for whatever points he could get, rather than go off the road and get none at all. And so it was that by the final World Championship rally of the season, on West Africa's Ivory Coast, the championship had come down to a straight fight between Röhrl and Michèle Mouton. Thanks to her efforts and those of Mikkola and Blomqvist, the Audi Quattro had already wrapped up the World Manufacturers' Championship. Michèle had scored 3 outright wins for the team, and Mikkola and Blomqvist had scored 1 each. The question in Africa was whether Audi could take her to the individual title that she so richly deserved. Sadly, tragically, the answer was no. Her father was dying from a terminal illness as the season drew to a close, and Michèle at times felt like withdrawing from the title battle. But it was her father's last wish that she should continue to strive to be motorsport's first ever female world champion. So strive she did. Cruelly, the championship was taken from her grasp in the very final stages. Röhrl roared on to victory as a devastated Michèle sat by the roadside with the Audi's transmission broken. On into the 1983 season, and the big news was the return of Lancia with a car as formidable as the legendary Stratos. A rally version of the Monte Carlo Sports Saloon, code-numbered the 037, the Lancia Rally bore little resemblance to its road-going counterpart. The previous season had seen the introduction of Group B, but both Audi and Opel, the season's champions, had elected to continue in the old Group 4 class for more production-oriented cars produced in greater numbers. Lancia had been the only manufacturer to go straight into the new class, which had much more relaxed rules. Only 200 cars had to be built for Group B, as against 400 in Group 4. More importantly, manufacturers were also permitted to build evolution models of the same car. The minimum build limit for these anything goes machines was just 20 cars. It was hardly surprising, therefore, that the company which gave us the Stratos went wholeheartedly for the new concept. Lancia treated 1982 more or less as a development year, suffering but solving all kinds of problems with both engines and chassis. They got their reward in 1983, when new signing Walter Röhrl won 3 championship qualifiers, while teammate Marco Alén took 2 more. The Group B Lancia Rally deservedly gave the company its first manufacturers' championship since the glory days of the Stratos in the mid-70s. Facing ever-growing opposition, Audi continued to develop the Quattro concept, making it shorter, lighter and more powerful. Audi went rallying to promote its Quattro concept of four-wheel drive production cars, and saw no marketing and sales value in producing specials which had little or no direct relationship to the cars it actually sold to the public. Power, however, always seemed to be uppermost in the minds of the German engineers. So when they started taking advantage of the Group B rules to build more specialised versions of the production Quattro, it was to this engine that they turned first. Through 1983 and 1984, the power output of Audi's 5-cylinder engine went up and up and up. Originally, there was a 350 to 400 horsepower version of the well-proven 10-valve engine with its 2 valves per cylinder. This was more than good enough to power Hannu Mikkola to the World Drivers' Championship in 1983, despite the determined efforts of Lancia drivers Walter Röhrl and Marco Alén. In mid-1984 came a fire-breathing Evolution version. 4 valves per cylinder, more turbo boost to take advantage of the improved engine breathing, and even experiments with water injection to cool and expand the fuel mixture charge. There was from 450 to 550 horsepower on tap, depending on where the driver positioned the turbo boost control. At that time, no rally car had developed more power. However, even with this sort of power available, the Quattro engineers realised there was still plenty of work to do. The production car still dictated the layout of things like engine positioning, and the Quattro had originally been developed from a front-wheel drive car. In four-wheel drive configuration, the engine was mounted much too far forward in the chassis for optimum handling, especially on tight tarmac sections. Powerful it might be, but the Quattro was still rather on the clumsy side and could be hard work for its drivers. Luckily, however, the World Rally Championship had by now developed into a series where remote dirt tracks outnumbered true road stages by about 10 to 1. This suited the high traction capabilities of the Audi and the sideways driving style of Sweden's Stig Blomqvist. He's been described as driving a four-wheel drive rally car just as he used to drive the old rear-wheel drive models. He'd keep the rear end hanging way out, but with all 4 wheels sliding rather than just the back ones. The Quattro allowed him to drive like that, putting all its 500-plus horsepower down onto the road at all times. The result was a double world championship for Audi in 1984. Blomqvist was world champion driver, and Audi took the manufacturer's title. At the time, the German Blitzkrieg must have looked unstoppable. But the Audi Blitzkrieg was stoppable, and this is the car which stopped it, the Peugeot 205 T16. The French company had made the decision to contest the World Rally Championship as soon as the Group B regulations were announced. They saw it as a way to further promote the capabilities of the already popular 205 GTI road car and they employed former top rally co-driver Jean Todt to mastermind the project. Todt, of course, has since gone on to even greater things. In the mid-90s, he became the boss of the Ferrari Grand Prix team. Always a thinker and a planner, Jean Todt examined the Group B regulations and determined that the way to go with the Peugeot project was to follow the path Renault had mapped out with their R5 Turbo. Take the basic front-engined front-wheel drive layout and scrap it. The engine was moved to the mid-car position, behind the driver but ahead of the rear axle, just like all other successful competition car layouts of modern times. To maintain the compact dimensions of the original 205 GTI, and so keep an easily recognizable family resemblance, the turbocharged engine was mounted transversely. The spare wheel of the 205 Turbo 16 resides where the engine lived in the original. Even though the T16 is short and compact, the designers kept the wheelbase as long as possible so that the handling would be accurate and predictable, rather than having the nervous characteristics of short wheelbase machines. The Turbo 16s were all built in a competition shop set up especially for that purpose. Back in those days, Peugeot was not involved in either Formula One or long-distance sports car racing, so it could concentrate all its time and budget on this single program. Unlike the Renault R5 Turbo, the rival French Marque's rally effort was to be a totally concentrated one. This concentration of time, budget and effort was to pay huge dividends. Things didn't go always 100% right, but in general, the Peugeot World Championship effort of 1985 was one of the most successful rally campaigns of all time. The 205 Turbo 16 was first seen in 1984, when the Audi steamroller seemed ready to flatten all comers. But even in its development season, it became obvious that the little French car had no intention of being flattened. The Peugeot was more compact than the Audi, it was lighter, it was more nimble in the areas where the Audi struggled, like on the tight tarmac stages, and it had four-wheel drive for optimum traction. Even while Audi was busy winning double titles in 1984, it was casting nervous glances in the direction of the Peugeot team and sending memos back to the competitions department at Ingolstadt. They read, "Don't stop the development programs just because we're winning." Audi were right to be nervous, because what they didn't know was something that Peugeot's engineers weren't telling anyone. The ace that the French team were playing very close to their chest was the fact that their 1985 engine would have a Formula One type turbocharger that would boost the power output of the little 1800cc four-cylinder engine to a minimum of 435 horsepower. If necessary, that figure could be pumped up to over 500 on maximum turbo boost. Not only was the Peugeot lighter and more manoeuvrable than the still bulky Audi, but it also had just about as much horsepower. Obviously, Peugeot's opposition had suspected that their backs might be against the wall in 1985, but they could have had no idea just how pressed against the brickwork they were going to be. However, they found out very quickly. Just 1 week into the new year, Ari Vatanen won the Monte Carlo Rally, victory in the event that every French rally team dreams of winning. Ari followed that up with another win in the snows of Sweden, then a crash in Portugal, followed by a bigger one in Corsica and an even bigger, near-fatal one in Argentina, which put paid to the Finns' title hopes. The mantle was taken up by his less erratic fellow countryman Timo Salonen. He picked up his first win in Portugal after Vatanen's crash, and then added 4 more in Greece, New Zealand, Argentina and his native Finland. Even though there was still the San Remo event left on the calendar, Salonen was able to celebrate an emphatic World Championship victory in front of his home fans. Of course, Peugeot were also victors in the Manufacturers' Championship, only 4 years or so after making the decision to contest the series. It was in October 1981 that Jean Todt had announced his retirement from co-driving to take up the appointment of Peugeot's Director of Competitions. At the start of 1982, the team revealed its intentions to enter the World Rally Championship for a first full season in 1985. By May 1984, the 205 Turbo 16 made its World Championship debut. By August 95, it was World Champion. Such was the pace of development in Group B rallying that the Lancia 037, which had won the World Manufacturers' Championship in 1983, was fading out of the picture in 1984 and was really just an also-ran in 1985. To match the opposition, a four-wheel drive car was needed, preferably a powerful and compact one like the Peugeot. This is what Lancia came up with, in the shape of the S4 rally version of their little Delta saloon. It was even more advanced than the Peugeot and used a combination of both supercharging and turbocharging to achieve the fullest possible power curve from initial pickup to the highest RPM. The S4 had the most advanced engine in the series, and Lancia was confident that if they had to, the power could be boosted to over 600 horsepower. Actually, they never needed it. Henri Toivonen's first outing with the car brought a win on the 1985 RAC rally, humbling even the title-winning Peugeots. In 1986, the young Finn started as he left off the previous year, simply dominating the Monte Carlo rally. This time, it was Peugeot which was getting nervous. Development in Group B was getting faster and faster. Toivonen also led the Swedish rally for Lancia, but went out with engine problems, giving the win to a new Peugeot driver, Juha Kankkunen. Even at this stage, it was obvious that there was likely to be a titanic battle for the championship, and that most people's money would be on Lancia. Toivonen had hit absolutely peak form at exactly the same time that Lancia had come up with what most people felt was the ultimate Group B car. But it all ended in tragedy. On Thursday, May 2nd, 1986, Henri Toivonen was in a class of his own and leading the Corsican rally by a huge margin. Then, the Lancia plunged off the mountain road and down into the trees. Both Toivonen and his co-driver Sergio Cresto were killed instantly. A year to the day after Lancia had lost another star driver, Attilio Bettega, when he crashed his 037 on the same rally. As they had a year earlier, the whole Lancia team withdrew from the rally on receiving the news of Toivonen's death. The challenge of the S4 for World Championship honours was, to all intents and purposes, over and done, as was Group B. This latest in a catalogue of tragic accidents, including spectator deaths in Portugal, led the International Automobile Federation to say enough is enough. Truly, they felt, the cars had become too fast to race. Not every car in Group B enjoyed success. As in any form of motorsport, there were those who didn't make it. Some of them might have if Group B had gone on longer, but we shall never know. Cars like this Citroën BX4TC, which appeared in 1986. Certainly it had potential, with four-wheel drive and a 430 horsepower engine, and Citroën later proved their rally capabilities with wins in the Paris-Dakar. But the history books will simply show that the three-car Citroën team all retired from the Acropolis Rally in 1986, loaded their broken cars and the rest of the gear onto the ship back to France, and were never seen again. The Group B Opel Manta actually did win an event, or would have done had not the organisers of the 1982 Mille Pistes International in France decided to ban prototypes while the event was actually in progress. Henri Toivonen was forced to give his first place award to a production car and accept a special prize instead. A year later, the Evolution version of the Manta 400 appeared and became a solid and reliable winning performer at national level. It could never, however, cut it with the big boys in the World Championship, and Opel, who had taken Walter Röhrl to the World Drivers' title in 1981, gradually faded from the Group B scene. Had the German team and its General Motors UK counterpart Vauxhall enjoyed the same budgets as Audi, Peugeot and Lancia, the story might well have had a happier ending. The British attempts to enter the Group B challenge also ended in tears, although the Ford RS 200 and the Metro 6R4 might well have done a lot better with more development time available. As it was, these latecomers to Group B really only got started as the category was about to be banned. The 6R4 was based on the silhouette of the little MG Metro Saloon, though you'd need a pretty good imagination and an eye for detail to see much of a resemblance. The original prototype of the car was actually built without the eye-catching wings and front airdown, but it soon became obvious that the 6R4 would be unmanageable at speed without them, and they were designed into the specification. All 200 cars built for homologation, whether the 430 horsepower International class contenders or the 300 horsepower Clubman models, were fitted with the wings. Another very different approach taken by Austin Rover for the 6R4 was in the choice of engine. It was decided to use a beefy 3-litre fuel-injected V6, rather than the small turbocharged 4-cylinder as favoured by Peugeot, Renault and Lancia. The theory was that the fuller torque of the bigger unit would make the car more manageable on rally stages than the high-revving little turbos. Austin Rover were sadly mistaken and gravely underestimated the engineering capabilities of the French and the Italians. The wings were an innovation which worked, but the choice of a non-turbocharged engine was, quite simply, a mistake. Not that the engine was a bad one. It had its early teething problems, like throwing off cam drive belts, but they were easily sorted out in later development. In fact, the same engine was taken over by TWR, who used it to develop an endurance sports car racing power unit capable of winning in both World Championship competition and the prestigious IMSA Sports Car Series in America. In both cases, it was badged as a Jaguar, and amazingly, it went on to be further developed by TWR into the twin-turbo engine which powered the Jaguar XJ220. Had Group B not been banned, it's quite feasible that Austin Rover could have turbocharged the 6R4 engine and turned it into a 600 horsepower plus powerhouse to match the Lancias, Peugeots and Audis. But we shall never know. It would be wrong to label the 6R4 a failure, for it was just not on the scene long enough to be developed. Certainly, it did display many faults in its few international events at the end of 1985 and at the start of the 1986 season, but many of these were subsequently ironed out in National Rally Series, where Group B was allowed to carry on, and in Rallycross. It should also be taken into account that Austin Rover never embarked on a full International World Championship programme, with all the development that comes with that kind of experience. Finances were always tight at Austin Rover, and the available budgets were spent mainly on contesting the 1986 British Open Series and World and European Championship events either in or within striking distance of the British Isles. The car's finest hour was certainly its international debut on the 1985 RAC Rally, where Tony Pond finished third behind the Lancias of Henry Toivonen and Marco Allen. What hopes that must have given Austin Rover for the future. Less than a year later, Group B was finished as an international category, but the 6R4 was a continuing threat in British Open competition, in the hands of drivers like Jimmy McRae, the father of current superstar Colin, and his almost as gifted younger brother Alistair. Jimmy won the 1986 Ulster Rally, while teammate David Llewellyn won the Manx International that same year. Ultimately, however, they lost out to the more reliable Ford RS 200 of Mark Lovell. Of the two British Group B contenders, it's probable, for a number of reasons, that the Ford RS 200 would have gone on to be the more effective. Firstly, its basic design and execution seemed better than the 6R4, especially in the choice of a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. This unit could put out from 350 horsepower in Clubman's trim to over 600 for international events. The car also proved itself by leading the Acropolis Rally from all of the major teams before retiring with mechanical woes. Again, we shall never know. Generally, however, the Ford seemed more reliable, more predictable, and as fast, if not faster, than its rival from Austin Rover. In the 1986 Shell Oil's British Open Championship, for example, the young Mark Lovell finished in every one of the 6 qualifiers to take the title. By contrast, the more experienced Jimmy McRae and his young teammate David Llewellyn finished only 6 events between them. They won a round each, and Lovell didn't score a single win. But the speed and consistency of the RS200 brought him a well-deserved title as McRae and Llewellyn fell by the wayside. Secondly, Austin Rover were in constant financial trouble at that time, and getting a proper budget to contest the World Championship Series would have been a problem. The team also lacked major successes to tempt big-time sponsorship. Ford, on the other hand, were in a much more stable situation and could point to innumerable rally successes in the 70s when making those all-important sponsor presentations. The RS200 did, in fact, go on to win several European Rallycross championships and was very much the car to beat in that short, sharp shock version of rallying. In fact, 10 years after the disappearance of Group B, and with the millennium fast approaching, the RS200 is still a front runner in the Rallycross wars. An amusing aside to the 6R4 versus RS200 confrontation is where the two cars were built. Austin Rover's competition department simply ran and developed the cars. Initial design and construction was farmed out to Williams Grand Prix Engineering. Ford, on the other hand, designed and built the prototype RS200 models and further developed and built the factory team cars. Construction of the 200 Clubman races necessary to get the Group B homologation was contracted out to Reliant Engineering in Tamworth, the same company that built the famed, or notorious, Reliant Robin three-wheelers. That's a fact which will probably change a lot of people's opinion about one of Britain's more unusual cars. The Reliant Robin, that is, not the Ford RS200. The final opinion of most experts on the RS200 is that had the class continued, it could have been a real contender in Group B. Certainly, the Ford was a strongly built car, as these crash test shots graphically demonstrate. Notice how the driver and co-driver's area remains intact as the front end crumples. And here's even more graphic proof of the structural integrity of the RS200 chassis. Those first RS200 models were all sturdily built, and even the car which led the Acropolis Rally in the hands of Sweden's fighter pilot turned rally driver Kalle Grundel was reckoned to be underpowered and overweight. The competition debut of the RS200 was on the British Championship Lindisfarne Rally at the end of 1985, and the car won the event. At the time, it was little more than a road car version, weighing in at 1,400 kilograms and having but 400 horsepower. Contrast that with the 1,000 kilograms and 500 horsepower of the Lancia S4 which Toivonen took to victory in the RAC Rally just a month later. The educated opinion on the RS200 is that it would have been a genuine title contender had the company stayed around long enough to enter the lighter, more powerful Evolution version which was under development when the pullout came. Audi, who joined Ford in an early withdrawal from Group B, had already debuted the final evolution of their car in 1985, and what a car it was. The Quattro S1 Sport was an aggressive-looking beast with huge wings and more horsepower than anyone else in the championship. Over 600 horsepower was rumoured to be on tap, and even Walter Röhrl felt that it was probably too much. Considering that he beat the Peugeots at the San Remo Rally in 1985, his opinion should be respected.
Im Prinzip bist du bei dem Auto mit dem Denken schon zu langsam.
Take a trip on board with him if you doubt his opinions. A trip that's also likely to convince you that Ford and Audi were quite right to withdraw from rallies until something was done about crowd control.
Achte auf der Aufgruppe, rechts minus eng, sofort mittellinks plus 60, mittellinks Wellenaufgruppe, sofort mittelrechts plus Land 70, rechts minus innen Aufgruppe, sofort links voll 50, mittelrechts plus innen, sofort links voll, sofort Gruppe voll 70, Achtung mittellinks plus 40, mittelrechts plus innen 50, Aufgruppe rechts voll 50, mittelrechts plus innen 50, Gruppe voll, sofort links minus, Achtung, Abzug links nach innen, sofort mittelrechts plus plus 80, Achtung mittellinks plus Ihnen 50, Nachgruppe mittelrechts plus Ihnen sofort mittellinks plus Ihnen 50, rechts sofort links 60, Achtung Nachgruppe links minus Ihnen 70, mittellinks plus Ihnen glatt 90, rechts minus sofort links minus Ihnen 70.
Driving a Group B car was an emotional and physical experience that inevitably took its toll on the drivers. Coping with the noise, the intense cockpit heat, and the sheer unadulterated stress of driving to the absolute limit on loose trails through solid walls of apparently crazy spectators took drivers to the very edge of their mental and physical capabilities. Doctors, physiotherapists, and even mind-relaxing gurus were a key element in every major team. The drivers needed all the help they could get. It was the same for the service crews. These cars needed as much technical attention as pampered Formula One racers. The only problem was that often they were miles from the nearest paved road, rather than in air-conditioned pit lane garages. The helicopter, therefore, became an essential part of any rally team's inventory. At least one, and often two or three. No wonder this whole incredible hype brought out huge crowds. Even Michel Mouton remembers those times as unbelievable.
Even the limit to be able to do what we had to do, and people on the road and people wanted to touch me when I was at the start of the stage. I remember forever one guy who opened the door to touch me when the guy was counting 3, 2, 1 just to go. I mean, it was difficult, but in another way, of course, I was trying to understand also that it was a normal way for them, and we have a chance to have a sport where the people can be so close to the driver. It's not like all the other sport where people are parked around. In the rallying, people are really part of the game. So if I have only one image, I think it's a positive picture, and a nice picture. If I have some emotion, of course, it's the noise of the Quattro. I mean, nobody can forget the noise. Even today, I think we miss this kind of noise.
While the awesome rally supercars were justifiably grabbing all the public attention, there was another side to Group B that never really got off the ground. The category was also intended for sports car racing, and Jaguar's chief engineer in the mid-80s, Jim Randall, actually designed the incredible 220 mph XJ220 supercar with that in mind.
I sat down and started thinking, what sort of car would one have to design that would be an effective road car, but with very little modification. It could be a race-winning car in effectively Group B. Now, Group B at that time was only rally cars. There was no Group B racing, road racing at that time. Nevertheless, it was an interesting category.
The Jaguar was actually disqualified from the GT class on a minor technicality. But no matter, it had proved its point and left us with an idea of what Group B sports car racing might have looked like. Had Group B sports car racing ever got off the ground, this is another car that would undoubtedly have been involved. Ferrari was a perennial rival to Jaguar in long-distance sports car events and had already designed and built the 288 GTO to contest the class. In fact, the 288 GTO was also intended to be Ferrari's rally contender, probably only on tarmac events, but one never knows. A rally version of the 308 GT had done well in Corsica and San Remo earlier in the 80s, and after all, Ferrari are part of the same group as long-time rally supporters Fiat and Lancia. Would we have ever seen this turbocharged 2.8-litre V8 out on the special stages with Audi, Peugeot, Ford and the rest of them? Again, who knows? But what a great sight to daydream about. Ferrari were obviously extremely serious about Group B, for they went ahead in 1986 and built 4 examples of a staggering evolution version of the 288 GTO. Essentially, it was a sports racing car with 650 horsepower from its twin-turbo engine. No one knows the exact purpose for which Ferrari intended the 288 GTO Evo to be used, but a return to Le Mans in the GT category is a good bet. When Group B was abandoned, Ferrari detuned the V8 to a mere 450 horsepower and further developed the 288 GTO, seen here, into the superb F40 road car. Since then, racing versions of the F40, using essentially the 288 GTO Evolution engine, have performed with success in GT sports car competition. Here's a rare chance to see a 288 GTO Evoluzione in racetrack action. Wherever you find Jaguar and Ferrari, you'll find Porsche. So it was no surprise to see this big three talking about involvement in Group B racing and building suitable cars. The Porsche 959 was perhaps the most complete car of the three in Group B terms. It was a superbly equipped, almost luxurious road car with four-wheel drive and an only slightly detuned version of the twin-cam flat-six engine from the company's dominant Le Mans cars. Performance was in the 190 mile-an-hour bracket and over 200 miles an hour for the lighter, more powerful competition version. There was even a racing version, the 961, much lightened and with 640 horsepower. Apart from a burst tyre, it cruised home to 7th overall at Le Mans in 1986 and won the GTO class, which was the closest equivalent to Group B in that race. Porsche chose an unusual arena in which to display the rallying capabilities of the 959, the awesome test of the 3-week-long Paris-Dakar Marathon, the bulk of which was run across the wastelands of North Africa's Sahara Desert. By doing this, Porsche sidestepped head-on confrontation with the World Rally supercars. They all had a 2 or 3 year development advantage by the time the original Porsche concept car on which the 959 was based was unveiled at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1983. A Porsche first appeared in the Paris-Dakar in 1984. There was a three-car team, in fact, of 3-litre turbocharged four-wheel drive cars that were effectively a hybrid of the 911 and the 959 prototype. Frenchman René Metge won the event, with Grand Prix star Jackie Ickx sixth after losing time replacing burnt-out wiring. The following year, 3 cars which were closer to the 959 specification were entered with bigger but non-turbo engines in the interests of reliability. In fact, all 3 retired. Ickx and fellow Grand Prix driver Jochen Mass hit rocks and damaged their cars beyond repair. Previous winner Metge missed a time control. In 1986, the true 959s appeared, and this time there were no mistakes. Metge won again, with Ickx second. What's more, even the backup service crew car finished 6th. A 200-mile-per-hour road-going supercar, a class winner at Le Mans, and a winner of the Paris-Dakar. By this reckoning, the Porsche 959 must have been the best all-round Group B car of them all. Peugeot were another company who took their Group B cars on the desert trail. When the category was banned from international rallying in 1986, the French company were left with a team of cars which had won the World Rally Championship for the past 2 years and were now left with precious few opportunities to compete. The choice for team manager Jean Todt was really an obvious one. At that time, no event in motorsport received more coverage in France than the Paris-Dakar. The whole nation, and much more of Europe as well, was caught up in the romance, the adventure and the dangers of racing from the French capital across Europe and the Sahara to the Atlantic coast city of Dakar in West African Senegal. Television images of this exotic event were beamed back each evening for 3 weeks onto primetime television in France and then out all over the world. To win the Paris-Dakar was a guarantee of huge home market sales in France and a respectable slice of the export market for any French manufacturer. Using rally stars such as Ari Vatanen, who won the event at his first attempt in 1987 and again in 1990, Peugeot dominated the event until they scaled down their efforts to move on into international sports car racing and eventually Formula One. It was a fitting way to bring down the curtain on one of the greatest team efforts in world rallying history. In 1985, Audi had taken their Group B Quattro to another incredible event. It was rather shorter than the Paris-Dakar, but it was equally unique in motorsport. Rather shorter indeed. The winning time was usually around 11 minutes instead of 3 weeks. Pikes Peak is a 14,000-foot mountain in Colorado, and since the earliest days of motoring, drivers have been racing up to the summit via a 12.5-mile dirt road. For 4 years, European Group B teams flocked to this American classic and totally dominated the proceedings. Despite the efforts of Ari Vatanen in the Peugeot, Walter Röhrl was king of the hill.
Nach Amerika gegangen, meine Arbeit zu machen. Hinten habe ich gesagt, Gott sei Dank, das war ein ganz wichtiger Punkt in meinem Leben, das muss man erlebt haben, dass man da mit 220 eine Schotterstraße hinaufahrt. Von der Straßenkante geht es wie von der Tischkante ohne alles 400-500 Meter ins Nichts. Mit einem Auto, das jenseits von 600 PS hat. Zu jedem Zeitpunkt kannst du mit dem Gasfuß irgendwas verkehrt machen. ein Auto, das damals das erste Rallye-Auto war, wo man ein bisschen Abtrieb versucht hat zu machen mit den Flügeln. Das war also unheimlich toll und ich muss sagen, ich habe es im Fahren genossen und habe aber auch noch mehr genossen, die Aufnahmen nachher vom Hubschrauber zu sehen, wie toll das Auto da, wie auf Schienen den Bergen aufgefahren ist. Also das war sicherlich schon der Gipfel, was man mit so einem Auto hat machen können.
But, in the final analysis, it will always be the rally supercars for which Group B will be remembered. Cars developed at such a pace that they simply became too fast for the terrain that they competed on. Cars that truly were too fast to race.